Welcome to this week's Treasury Career Corner podcast, where I interview Treasury professionals about their Treasury careers. Each and every week, I talk to treasurers about how they built their careers, where they are now, and where they see both themselves and the Treasury profession going to next. In this week's show, delighted to be joined by Michael Bradley, the former Assistant Treasurer and Executive Director for Foreign Exchange and Investments at Celgene. Now, Celgene have recently been acquired by Bristol-Myers Squibb. So rather than describe about Celgene, who are a biotech company and everything else, I'll get Michael to describe it a little bit later in the show when he brings us up to date. Suffice to say, he's got a great background, Mr. Bradley. He's all the way from doing his accounting degree up to, most recently, Assistant Treasurer, as I say, with Celgene. Brilliant career. So we're going to dig into it a little. We did a little bit veering off at one stage in tax. We'll address that in the show. Not hold it against him. It's all right. Don't worry. But joking aside, Michael, it's over to you really with the show. So talk us through and how you first ever, finance, accounting, and then discover the wonderful world of Treasury. So over to you, sir.
Thanks, Mike. So I started out with an accounting degree and went to work in public accounting for about 3 years, but decided that was really not the path I wanted to go down.
Right.
Decided to redirect my career, got an MBA, and then went to Merck, which is a global pharmaceutical company. And they had a rotational program for MBAs. So the way it would work, you would work for about 15 months to 18 months in a given role, and then you'd move to another one. And it was all self-directed. Like once you got your first job, you're kind of assigned your first job.
Is that like a rotational graduate program? So you do that, fill in a gap, build a bit, and then move on, or different to that?
Yeah, basically. They wanted people, Merck was trying to take their MBAs and build broad general managers that knew the whole business. So they wanted you to work in different parts of finance, get exposed to different areas of the company. And so that's how it was set up. But it was based on what you were interested in and what opportunities were available as well. So I indicated that I wanted to be in Treasury when Merck hired me, and they put me in a group called HR Financial Services, which was basically HR FP&A, but it was sitting in Treasury for some reason. Right. So as far as they were concerned, they gave me Treasury, and it was like nothing like Treasury, but it was I was around all the Treasury people and all that sort of stuff. I didn't really enjoy it that much, and so I was keen to move on. And the next role that I took was in this manufacturing financial analysis group. And it wasn't really an FP&A group. It was almost like an investment bank group sitting within the manufacturing group. And so we helped the manufacturing group with their siting decisions, with capacity decisions, as well as with sort of business development stuff. So Merck started out as much more of a chemical company and then transitioned to pharmaceuticals. But they had a lot of legacy businesses that we were helping them sort of divest and manage, like supply contracts to other companies with. And the key thing in that role was that with my sort of CPA background and whatnot, I recognized that there were a lot of inefficiencies in how Merck was making citing decisions. They were worried about product costs, and they were trying to save a half a cent per pill or something like that by putting things in the most efficient plants that they had. When if they put it in a different plant that had a better tax jurisdiction, they could save 15 cents a pill in taxes. So we started pushing that to senior management in the manufacturing group, and they kind of, at first there was resistance, but they eventually came fully on board and really started to think more. They started to consider the broader picture for the company rather than just their product costs. And it was a great relationship, and the tax people at Merck started noticing what I was doing. They knew that I knew all the supply chains and financial supply chains and physical supply chains at Merck, which was no small feat. And they brought me into the tax department to do tax planning, which was not something I'd ever really thought was going to be part of my career. It was a really odd detour to take. And I was not a great fit within the tax group even, because everyone there, at least of the senior people, I was the director at this point in tax, everyone that was a director above had either a law degree or a master's of tax. And here I was, new to the group. And by the way, everyone in tax, no one rotated into tax. You were hired into tax. You stayed your whole career in tax. I was an oddity to them too. They didn't know what to make of me. But I worked with some really great people. The people that I specifically worked with within the tax group were very supportive of me, allowed me to really do some really neat stuff. So I negotiated tax grants in Puerto Rico, I had negotiated tax grants with Singapore, and I'd started one with a negotiation with Switzerland, but I ended up moving to Treasury before that one was completed. But I've done a lot of neat stuff within the tax area in a very relatively short period of time. But the director of FX risk management at Merck position came open, and this was like a dream job to me. This is what I really wanted when I started at Merck, was to work in one of these areas. And FX in particular seemed like, to me, the coolest. It was, all these countries and all these markets and stuff, and trying to piece all that together and dealing with the banks and everything. I thought it was going to be really exciting. And it was. Like, from the moment I started working in that area, I fell in love. It to me, every day was a new day. The markets were constantly different, and trying to marry what's going on in the markets externally with what's going on within your company. To me, that was just a really fun and exciting thing. And so I started doing that FX right around 2007, the beginning of 2007.
And so 2007, what was FX and doing the FX stuff like then? Was it trading? It was still early IT technology wise as well. So, was it much more manual and using your own resources, would you say?
No, they had already started. So here's a funny story. When I was doing HR financial services, when I first started at Merck, they had this room right near where I sat that had a vault. And it was like, it had serious locks on it and stuff. And inside that room, they also had a desk and a monitor and the phone, like the banks had, or they used to have at least, where it would beep every few seconds to let you know they were recording. We recorded all the calls too, but that was the trading room. So someone was going to do FX trades, had to go into this vaulted room and do their trades. It's like this funny thing. And then, by the time I came back in 2007, we already had FX all set up, so electronic trading, and we did that for all of the forwards and swaps, basically. And then for non-deliverable stuff and for options, we traded that stuff over the phone typically. And I think those platforms have moved on, so they're even better now. I don't know if they're still that good for options, unless you're doing really short-dated stuff. But NDFs they are easier to do now in FXall.
What was the thing that, with FX, was it the immediacy of it, or was it the impact on the balance sheet, or combination of that? What was it that gave you the passion, thinking, oh, wow, I'm doing this every day? Or why was it such a buzz?
It was totally new to me. And Merck had like a really robust program, I would say. So the CFO at the time that I took on the role, so here's the interesting thing. The CFO, when I took on the role, was Judy Lowen. She had set up basically all of finance and the way she wanted it, particularly Treasury. She kind of came up through Treasury, and she had done the FX risk management early in her career. And she wrote an article in the Applied Journal of Finance about Merck's FX hedging program. And it turned out when I talked to people at other companies, particularly pharma companies, they're like, oh, I've read that article by Judy Lowen. And this was like 15 years before I started doing FX, but people were still reading it and using it as a blueprint for how to set up their program. So the CFO had my job. The treasurer at the time had my job, and the AT that I reported to had my job. So I knew nothing about FX. So it was
no pressure.
It was a very challenging environment to step into. Like, everyone knew more than I did about what I was doing, but I really just threw myself into it and learned how Merck did everything, which is it's a fantastic setup, the way they thought about risk and managed risk. And having the sort of that article, which I did read, it was one of the first things they gave me when I started in that role. It kind of helped. It's a great article. It helps you understand as a treasury professional how to think about risk to the company rather than just broadly what's going on in the market, how it's affecting the company, and how to mitigate that.
Well, what we'll do is we'll try and find a link to that and put that in the show notes afterwards as well. And you say about how, from the sounds of it, how leading edge, if you like, or certainly based on that article and other things. But, how did, Merck and foreign exchange at Merck sort of stack up in the markets in comparison to some of your competitors? Sometimes when I've spoken, we've worked with Nike in the past, and they, one of the top houses, look at FX, and they drill down with their FX, go right down into the supplier chain and things like that. And that's without talking too much, because we can't explain too much on the air because some of it's private. But more than that, they are one of the leading groups. Sounds like Merck were the same at that time as well. Would that be the case?
Yeah, I would say so. We were also big, so we traded at large volumes, and the banks were always asking us to come and talk, be on panels and talk at things and whatnot. And they were also frequently asking us to talk to other companies about how we think about mitigating FX risk and how we manage things. And one of the companies that called us was Celgene, which I later went to, and they were setting up their program. And I talked to, at that time, Sandra Ramos-Alves, who's now she's AT at Bristol-Myers, and walked her through what we did and everything. And so we were, I think, considered to be pretty influential. And it was good. That actually helped me explain, when I was explaining to other companies what we did, it kind of reinforces your understanding of things, make sure that you really understand and you can explain it in a easy way to someone else. I think that helped me in my sort of development.
And what's your ethos around FX? Is it just mitigate all the risk and lay it off and that's it? Or overall, what's your attitude to FX? I mean, just before, because these were the early days when you were at Merck, we're talking, again, for the listeners, this was 07 to 2014. Then you made the move 2014 to Celgene. We'll come on to that. But you were being coached by people. What was it? Mitigate the risk, get rid of it all? Or what was the sort of overriding thoughts around FX at the time?
I'll probably go off on a small tangent because this is like a year and a half before the Lehman crisis. But the way we thought about things was we had a multi-year layering strategy for cash flow risk management. And we did not hedge everything. We hedged like a high percentage of the major exposures. And the idea was not to eliminate all FX risk, but to sort of mute it and spread it out over a period of time and allow the companies to transition. If you go through a cycle of dollar strengthening, you're delaying that so the business has time to adjust. You're never going to fully eliminate it. Although we did use options primarily as our hedging instruments. So it was kind of interesting. We looked at the history way before I even started through like 2012 or something. I remember looking at this, and we were basically break even on the options. But what happened was in the years where you didn't need a payout, FX was moving in your favor, and in the dollar strengthening years, we were making a lot of money on the options. But you added up all those years, it was like a net zero. So that tells me that options are efficiently priced.
And then, as you say, you were in there for 7 years. Doing well, and then you made a move on. What happened?
Well, so Merck was going through some lean years in that period. I had wanted to become an assistant treasurer. That was what I wanted at Merck, really. And they were just going through rounds and rounds of layoffs. And then they did a merger with Schering-Plough, and then there were more layoffs and all sort of stuff. It was a really difficult environment to get promoted in. And even though I was doing really well doing FX there, and they were, the management was very encouraging to me, that it just seemed like the opportunities wasn't there. And so I had decided I needed to look externally, and Celgene came calling. And so I took the move and don't regret it at all. The only regret I have is that maybe I should have moved earlier. 7 years was a long time, but I really enjoyed the people I was working with, the stuff I was doing at Merck. So it wasn't like I was unhappy. I just felt like I was ready to do more,
And then again, so Merck, we've talked about that, but explain maybe for the listeners, you and I know what Celgene are about, but again, some listeners will know, some number of people, who are they? So maybe, because then that'll then trickle down into the FX and investment management that you were then doing in that new role.
Sure. So Celgene was a global biotech focused on new medicines for conditions that had unmet needs, like really life-threatening diseases, things like multiple myeloma and other sort of blood cancers primarily. But they also had branched off into inflammation and immunology. So they were also doing stuff for psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, irritable bowel syndrome, and stuff like that. But most of their revenue was coming from sort of hematology-oncology products. And in my first week or so at Celgene, they just finished a quarterly or annual report release. And so they did a town hall, like a finance town hall. And this is one thing that Celgene was just amazing at, but they would have patients come and do testimonials about the product and how it changed their life. And it's like when someone has a disease like cancer and they basically have like a death sentence, to take this drug and then just be totally free of it for some period of time, it's really amazing. And it really brings home, you're doing Treasury, but you're helping enable, this company to do things for people like this. Mm. And I think that's part of why I like working at Merck. But I think that Celgene brought the patient perspective even more to the employees and made you really feel like you were helping the company achieve, real meaningful transformation in certain disease categories.
I was going to say, and the move from Director of Foreign Exchange at Merck for 7 years to then Celgene, Assistant Treasurer of FX, Senior Director and things like that, exactly the same, just same day, different desk, turn the handle?
Yeah, it was the FX stuff was really easy to pick up. It was the same systems, they used Reval. We had moved to Reval before I left Merck. A similar sort of timeline in terms of how they were hedging. It was almost even easier because they could forecast balance sheet amazingly well, which was always a troublesome area at Merck to do balance sheet forecasting. But at Celgene, it was much easier. And in a sense, it was ideal. It was pretty easy. Mm. The only thing was that they used primarily forwards instead of options. But over time, when I thought there was a need or it might be a better instrument, I would recommend it, and they would switch to that. But it was primarily a forward-based program. But they were flexible, and that was kind of the neat thing about Celgene was that they would try things if you thought it was a good idea, they would try them out, and so the program was a little bit more fluid than it was at Merck.
Well, given that, were there other ways that they were different, or what were the key similarities or key differences maybe? Again, for someone listening in today and they're saying, I might make a move, but I want to change, or I want to, is FX the same everywhere? And it's just, or is it just about different attitudes towards it sort of thing?
Yeah, so there are certainly a huge number of similarities, particularly because I think Celgene set up their system based on how Merck was set up. And in fact, they had hired a tax person from Merck who set up their distribution system. So their distribution system it mirrored Merck's distribution system almost. And in fact, they made theirs even better. It was simpler than what Merck had. And so it made my job a little bit easier, that's what it felt like. But I think it can be very different depending on the company. So I've talked to people at other pharma and biotech companies, and they necessarily don't always do things the way that Celgene or Merck did it. And you go to other industries and they're much more into the supply chain and than we were at Merck or Celgene. It was all biotech and pharma companies. It's more centralized and streamlined. You have one or two distribution hubs that sell globally, so it makes it easier. Some supply chains may be much more complicated to other companies. Within Merck and Celgene, it was very similar.
Mm. I was going to say, team-wise, how were you organized and what was the sort of the dynamics there as well?
Yeah, so that was probably the biggest difference was that Merck, I'm not even sure how many people we had in Treasury, but it was probably over 30 people. And like I said, there were a lot of layoffs, so it was probably at one time over 40 people. And Celgene had 12 people, including the treasurer. So the way we were set up, we had one person doing insurance. We had 2 people doing FX and investments, including me. We had 3 people doing debt capital markets, which was sort of like debt issuance, interest rate hedging, and share repurchase. Mm. And then we had 4 people doing cash management. And actually one of the cash management people was almost exclusively just doing KYC with the banks, doing account openings and closings and stuff.
And so given that sort of differential in number of people, did, say that, call it 3 times as many people at Merck, without being critical of Merck, were they 3 times better?
So, yeah, I think the issue with Merck was that it was far more complex in terms of entities, number of entities, and organizational structure. Right. Celgene was by necessity simplified. They had one global hub that distributed, so it made it easy for FX and whatnot, but it also made it easy for the cash people. Everything flowed through a single entity. It wasn't going through multiple places. When they did monthly nettings, kind of everything was kind of coming into one entity and then being distributed from that entity to up the stream, And so it was streamlined. So that enabled us to have a lot fewer people doing the same functions. But yeah, I think you could have had fewer people at Merck, and they were. I mean, they kept reducing the number of people there every year, it seemed like. But I remember, so Merck had things that Celgene didn't have. They had pensions, so they had a pension team, and their insurance team was quite large, and we had just one person doing insurance. And it's always a determination of how much do you outsource to brokers and whatnot like that. And so Merck chose to be leaner in terms of number of people and maybe outsource some of the stuff or the work.
And just with, we talk about people there and things like that. And I know that more recently Celgene, got taken over by Bristol-Myers, and, we'll talk about that. But, you had those people. What were you like? Were you directly managing a lot of them? And what were you like as a boss sort of to those guys?
Yeah, so at Celgene, I only ever had one person reporting to me at a time. I had two different people reporting to me. And the way we were set up, we had two ATs and a director of insurance who was sort of separate. And then with it between debt capital markets, FX and investments, and cash management, we had four really talented manager level people. And there was a decision after about 2 years there, after I've been at Celgene for about 2 years, that they wanted to help develop these managers by doing rotations. So the woman who reported to me the first 2 years moved to a different area. She was kind of a quasi debt capital markets, quasi cash person. She did a lot of cash forecasting. And then the woman who was doing debt capital markets moved over and did FX and investments. And so she and I worked together for the last 3 or 4 years that I was at Celgene. And so I didn't go through a real hiring process. We did hire one manager about 7 or 8 months after I joined Celgene, but that manager worked for the other AT, but I was part of the hiring decision. So I think over the course of my career, I've only hired 3 people. Most of the people I've just inherited, they worked for me. They worked in the role when I got there.
And so, when there's much more a one-to-one, I know some people manage bigger teams and things like that, but, you were coaching those guys, but you obviously qualified in as accounting originally and things like that, but you big into qualifications and things, CTP and stuff like that, or you've not thought it's something you need to do, or what are your thoughts?
Yes, I don't put a lot of weight on a CTP. I think if someone has a CPA, I think that's helpful. Particularly how important hedge accounting is for FX and for interest rate hedging. It's just helpful to have that kind of background. It's not necessary, but I think it's always helpful. And I think having an MBA is also really helpful. I'd much rather see someone with an MBA than a CTP, because it just kind of broadens your thinking and maybe helps you kind of think strategically more. And I think that's one of the key. You're running an FX program or an investment program or whatever, but you need to be thinking about, not just what's going on externally in the markets, but how what you're doing is going to affect the business, how you're going to help the business achieve their objectives, and their goals. And so, I think having someone, with an MBA or something like that, they're more likely to take a bigger, more strategic picture.
Business aspect rather than maybe more focusing on treasury, although I know that you can do CTP and it really develops your treasury skills. But as you say, you've got breadth of experience anyway, so that that's a key thing. One of the things with yourself, obviously you've got this strength of FX and everything else, and you work within these global multinational groups and things like that. You've seen treasury develop over the years. Where do you see it going more recently? We've seen automation, and I was interviewed last week with the Association of Treasurers, and it was like, don't worry, robots aren't going to take your jobs. They just replace the mundane and routine and get rid of that. But, upskills the level of treasury, so to 60, it might get rid of 260K people and bring in 180K person, whatever that might be, to really interpret the information and do that. But what are you seeing as the big developments in treasury, and what should people listening today be thinking? You're saying, right, if you guys should do one thing, it's this, or think about this. What would you say? What's your thoughts?
So, I agree that automation is going to continue to be the main driving force. And whether you say automation, I've heard a lot of people talk about AI and how that's going to change things? I don't know. To me, that's more automation as well. But it's true. You're going to need less worker bees and more people that can take the data and interpret it and run with it, and less people just, doing the rote work. That work's going to go away. More straight through processing, less keying in of things, but more analysis and understanding what it means to your company and how to manage that. So to me, that's the biggest trend. One of the things that I thought was interesting is that since I was at Merck and then at Celgene, I was a member of the NOI group. And I heard a lot of companies talk about that one of the things they were looking for in new employees was coding experience. And this was mostly like tech companies that were members of the NOI group. And I had never given this much thought, but they were saying how they wanted employees that could write algorithms and do some coding to help streamline some of their operations that they were doing. And to me, I thought it was interesting, but I felt like that's really the job of your vendors to do that sort of stuff. It's not really where I would necessarily want to direct my resources, but it might be the direction that we're going, and we might just be a late adopter or something like that. I think that's interesting, but I think it's really more the automation that's going to eliminate the mundane task and make the group a much more of an analytical group than it has been historically.
That's the first time ever I've had someone actually say, it'd be good to have someone with some programming experience. What I mean by that is, and just to qualify a little bit, people want people that are technically strong. So you'll be technically strong in Treasury. You may be able to program in macros on Excel, or that level of analytical, not quantitative skill, but maybe that you're able to utilize that. I had Todd Yoder on this show weeks ago where he was up on stage at Eurofinance writing in code because he wanted to understand it. Severin Leblenek from Honeywell, she can write so she can program robots because she wanted to understand what these guys were going on about the other side of the table. Now those guys are technically very strong, but their backbone of their experience is Treasury. Isn't necessarily can they code? Can they do that? Now, I wouldn't say I'm surprised, but that's the first time I've heard it sort of voiced out that people are saying, "Oh, I want guys that are up to code." It's not something I've ever seen on a job description. I've got guys that are that level, but they tend to be going more into the system side of things rather than more general corporate treasury. I don't know. It sounds like that might be changing from the sounds of it.
It could be, yeah. Like I said, I heard it from more than one tech company. I can't remember if it was an investment or a FX group that we were meeting at, but I thought that was really interesting. It kind of alarmed me. We don't have any of that.
We're hitting the coding books. That's it. You have to learn in COBOL quick. And where do you see yourself, where do you see Treasury developing itself? We got that we've talked about the more technical aspects there, but, have you seen more things with the CFO coming to you with different questions that they asked you 10, 15 years ago, or is it exactly the same? Or what's been the development, you would say?
I think with things like Brexit, and this has been going on for a while, because there was the Euro crisis with Greece, possibly, everyone was worried that Greece or Italy or one of these countries was going to leave the Euro. That predated Brexit. But these are the things that are really worrying CFOs, those are big picture problems, and they want to make sure that they understand how it's going to impact their business. And really, that means you've got to reach out to the operations groups and understand what their footprint is in those markets. And I think you're viewed as, even though it's maybe a more of an operational thing, having a backup plan to maybe move some stuff out of those markets or find a way to just work around the issue when it comes. You're the advisor to the CFO or to the, if you're an assistant treasurer, to the assistant treasurer on how to handle that sort of thing. Well, I just think that these sort of big global flare-ups are not going to go away. They're going to continue to happen, I think. So it's funny because when I first started, everything in FX was based on interest rates differentials between markets and stuff. And then we got down to close to zero or negative rates. And now everything is political changes, in different countries. That's what really moves the FX rates and stuff. So it's interesting. It's a very interesting cycle to be going through right now.
It seems like you have to be more of a semi-economist as much as an FX lead, if that's the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
So as we approach the end of today's show and, we sort of brought ourselves up to date, and those guys listening, as we said earlier, that Celgene was actually brought out by Bristol-Myers. So Michael is out there and we're looking for roles for Michael. So this is a living, breathing advert for you and your background, which is fantastic. But, in personal terms, and we'll put in your LinkedIn profile in the show notes so people can connect to you and everything else, what would you say are sort of some of the tips? If some, a junior member of staff or someone were to ask you, say, sitting having a beer at a conference and they say, looking back at your background, I really like it and I'd love to follow in your footsteps. What sort of advice would you give to those guys, or what are the key 2 or 3 things that they should be focusing on to be successful in your eyes, or to sort of follow on, sort of thing?
Yeah, I think if you're a junior, I think getting sort of financial modeling skills, really honing those is a positive, and really understanding sensitivities and how different inputs affect your outcome. Like that's when I do interview people, and I said I've only hired like 3 people, but when I do interview people, I ask them, tell me about a financial model, a complex financial model that you developed, and I want to understand how they thought through it and what were the inputs. Did they run sensitivities? What was the outcome most sensitive to, and how did you then think about, managing that, or how much could you control that single input? That I'm trying to get to, 1, their ability to model stuff, and 2, how to think through complexity, and so to me, that's always important. And I think it's a great skill to have in Treasury in general. I think as you're working your way up, take note of who you work for and their management style. Do you think they're a good manager or a bad manager? Because you can learn from both. And I've been fortunate. I've worked for some really great people over the years, and I've worked for a couple of kind of averages to mediocre managers as well, and better managers heard of lately. And I've taken learnings from each of those, and I really try to emulate when I'm managing someone, like how would this person have handled this situation, I find that really helpful. And I think if you're young and you're trying to build your career, I think taking stretch assignments, things are outside of your normal work definition, would be great, like cross-functional assignments and things like that will really help build your skills. So those would probably be the 3 things, take note of good managers and bad managers and what you like and don't like about how they do it, really build your financial modeling skills.
Well, I think the one that really sticks out to me is the emulation. Emulate your, the positive and negatives, just like if you've got a good, I've done that myself as well. I sometimes look back at some of the previous bosses I had and I think, I love the way they used to do that. And then the flip side as well, one sticks out to me that, a guy sort of pulled me to one side and sort of really, taught me a new one sort of thing and said loads of stuff. And and at the time I was one of the, if not the top biller. And I just said to him, look, and we went out, I said, look, can we ever just do coffee? And we sort of went into a room and I remember just saying to him, I said, don't ever do that to me again. Because, I won't ever respect you for it. I'm here to be respected as much as you. And I said, I'll always respect upwards, but, try and do it the other way around. And, and it was, he never did it again, and I said, look, if you've got a problem, let's just go do it over a coffee and you can shout at me, but don't do it in front of people. But as you say, if you can emulate those guys, then the good ones emulate and the bad ones, throw that in the bin sort of thing. So that's great.
Yeah.
So Michael, we'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Great, to find out a lot more about FX there and, some good, stories and things like that. And as I say to everyone listening today, connect to Michael if you're looking for someone. And but in general terms, thank you very much for a really interesting journey through your career, sir.
Thank you, Mike.
Many thanks.